conversation. So thank you so much to Capital Power for supporting this conversation about hope. And our host for this session is one of the most hopeful people I know, Alberta EcoTrust's own Vice President, Rod Ruff. Rod, take it away.
Thanks, Vicki. I didn't realize you would characterize me that way, so I'll try to live up to it. Well, thanks, Vicki. I'm very excited to be hosting Cultivating Hope. I think I was asked to host this session because it is the one area of the gathering programming that I most look forward to. 8 years ago, when we started sketching out what this event should look like and what the objective should be, I still remember Dana Duke from the Mistaki Institute stating that she wanted an annual parade, this place for us all to get together, collectively catch our breaths, and take the time to acknowledge and celebrate the good work that is being accomplished across the province every day and every year. And I think this is as important as ever, 8 years later. I honestly feel in many ways that we've passed a tipping point with respect to environmental challenges here in Canada. There's strong public support for climate and environmental policy and leadership from the nonprofit, corporate, and most levels of government. The challenge, though, we now face is one of speed and scale. I used to think that the challenge was pausing and taking the time to reflect on what has been achieved before we moved on to the next big challenge, or dug our heels in and got back to work on those challenges we've been working on for years and decades. But I now feel like we're being crushed by the overall weight of these issues we're trying to address: climate change, biodiversity, water security, addressing issues of social equity, and living through a global pandemic. In many ways, we're now continuously confronting our own expectations of the transformation that's required to create a resilient, inclusive, prosperous, climate safe, and nature abundant future. I know many of us wake up wondering every day if what we're doing is enough. I think half of our meetings at Alberta EcoTrust end in an almost existential crisis as we try to find credible pathways and solutions to the challenges we face as a society. So we called this session Cultivating Hope today because we wanted to take time on this day to remember and think about how we are progressing. That amazing work is being done, and it is still important to reflect and acknowledge these successes so we can nurture our own well-being as humans in this movement to a sustainable future. So we hope that's the outcome that you walk away with today. I'll get into introducing our speakers who are hopefully going to contribute to that outcome and that feeling of hope. And starting off today, we are learning from the Eastern Slopes Community-Based Aquatic Monitoring Collaborative. And the last decade, we've seen this just a remarkable increase in collaboration for environmental work in Alberta. And I believe this initiative is one of the best we've seen. It compromises representatives from watershed planning and advisory councils, Parks Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, First Nations, academia, and consultants. The project is focused on equipping cross-sectoral collaborators along the Eastern Slopes with the tools and resources they need to build meaningful community-based water monitoring programs, which helps those communities address and prepare for water and climate issues. Presenting today is Sophie Forstrom. She's the Education Program Manager for the Old Man Watershed Council based out of Lethbridge. In addition to overseeing education projects like engaging recreationists and supervising summer staff, she also coordinates the Old Man Watershed Council's volunteer restoration events and aquatic biomonitoring program in the headwaters. She has a master's degree in applied ecology, but I also think she has a master's degree in what I would call as the sideways slide glance. I think one of my favorite moments in the last few years was watching Sophie film a video doing restoration work on land that had been used and degraded by off-highway vehicles, and seeing her glance sideways at an OHVer as they ripped past her while filming. I'm looking forward to her presentation today. She's also joined by Reagan Mallinson from Living Lakes Canada, who has also been supporting this incredible work and will contribute to the panel discussion later in the event. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Sophie.
Thanks, Rod. I hope everybody can hear me okay and everyone's having a great day. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. Let's just jump right into it. We'll go to the next slide, please. So I work for the Old Man Watershed Council, as Rod mentioned, and we are one of the watershed planning and advisory councils, specifically for the Oldman Basin, but there are 11 in Alberta. And these WPACs, as we call them, work with stakeholders through education and stewardship. And my role for the past 6 years here at OWC has been, as Rod mentioned, to manage our Headwaters education and restoration programs. However, last year when COVID hit, a lot of these public events were canceled, and I found myself with a little bit of extra time on my hands. So I was able to organize this other component, which turned out to be a logical next step to our restoration work, and that was aquatic biomonitoring. I'll go to the next slide, please. And so rather than start from scratch, we chose to use this established program called the Canadian Aquatic Biomonitoring Network. And in that program, we collect benthic macroinvertebrates, or these are the aquatic insects that live at the bottom of streams. And their community composition provides us with a really nice indication of stream health. And this is a great program to use because it's got a standardized protocol that's used across the country. There's already training available. There's an online database. And so that was really handy. We didn't have to start from scratch. It's pretty cost effective. And when I took the training for this, I also learned there's a stream program, which is sequencing the rivers for environmental assessment and monitoring. And that also uses the same cabin protocols, but uses DNA for metabarcoding. So it's kind of a neat extra component. And if we go to the next slide. So 2019, pre-pandemic, I attended field training in Canmore, and that's where I met Reagan with Living Lakes Canada, as well as folks from the Ghost Watershed Alliance Society. And that was a great experience. I learned about stream and cabin, and we all stayed in touch through 2020 and supported each other in procuring equipment and sorting out the logistics of developing these community-based monitoring programs in our respective watersheds. And we started to realize, you know, that this could be something really big. It could be something more. There would be more groups probably interested in doing this. And it would be really handy if we all used the same protocol rather than everybody reinventing the wheel. So I invited other WPACs, watershed stewardship groups, First Nations, organizations to collaborate with us. And we hosted numerous virtual conference calls and a series of field certification courses delivered by Living Lakes Canada in Coleman, the Christmas Pass, and Rocky Mountain House. And then we also were able to get an individual trainer out to Pincher Creek. So considering that the last year and a half has been pandemic, I'd say I'm pretty pleased that we've been able to get, you know, what's that, 41 field technicians trained, and we have a waiting list of more people wanting training, field training, and then we have a number of people who have also become or are working on becoming certified at the project manager level as well. So that's been really fantastic. We'll go to the next slide, please. And so this collaborative, this Eastern Slopes Community-Based Aquatic Monitoring Collaborative has grown over the last year and a half to include over 40 individuals from more than 20 organizations across the Eastern Slopes and Alberta, and even in other provinces as well, that are providing support. And so we're working together to seek funding, procure equipment, build capacity in these groups, you know, get training for staff and volunteers, identify study questions, and find some sites to sample. And each organization is at a different stage. Some are collecting field samples already, while others are at the kind of seeking funding and training stage. But we're all meeting every few months to update and support each other along the way. And that's been really great. Next slide, please. And I think that this community-based biomonitoring collaborative cultivates hope, which is the theme of our session today, in a number of important ways and at a number of different scales, from the individual to the organizational and systemic level as well. So we'll start small. Next slide. First, this monitoring is community-based. So it's local, it's driven by local community needs. It can be a bit more flexible than some larger monitoring programs because it's coordinated by smaller organizations. and can make the data available to the community in a timely fashion. And very importantly for me, coming from the education lens, it's a really fantastic experiential learning opportunity. It's, you know, training, experiential learning, and an opportunity to engage and motivate local citizens. And by providing something tangible for people to contribute to in a community setting, it's making people part of the solution. And that inspires hope and provides an antidote to, you know, this environmental grief or anxiety or despair that we might be feeling in today's day and age. Next slide, please. And the power of these local projects or studies is that we're able to answer local study questions. We use a standardized protocol, but we're able to answer really specific questions. You know, some things like, what are the impacts of land uses on water quality or watershed health? At OWC, we're looking at assessing any changes after restoration or the implementation of beneficial management practices. Other groups are looking at wildfire impacts or source water quality or fish habitat and sediment. So we can all use the same methods, but we can answer really specific questions that are important to our local communities. Next slide, please. And not only are we answering these questions that matter to our local communities, but we're also contributing on a regional or even national scale to data that is currently lacking. In 2017, and then again in 2020, World Wildlife Fund undertook a health and threats assessment of Canada's watersheds, and both the North and South Saskatchewan river basins were considered data deficient for benthic macroinvertebrates. And so we are able to contribute through our monitoring, our local monitoring programs, to this national data, which is pretty exciting. Next slide, please. This is just a small sample of what sites have been sampled. You know, starting in 2019 with that first training provided by Living Lakes Canada, and then at OWC, we didn't really get any sampling started until last fall, 2020, and then doing more this year in 2021. I haven't included all the sites yet because the field season isn't over yet. And so hopefully this map will become even more populated with more sites, even further down in our watershed and all the way up north a little bit as well, which is great. We're seeing more sites being added across the eastern slopes. Yeah, you can go ahead to the next slide. Another unique aspect of this collaborative is our approach to developing a reference model, which we're hoping to use to analyze the data that we're collecting here in Alberta. Cabin uses a reference condition approach to analyzing the data, but there is no model yet for the eastern slopes here in Alberta. And these models are usually built by government agencies or they're contracted out. And so I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe that our collaborative is unique in that we're working on developing and building a new model at a grassroots level. So folks within the collaborative, we're working with FRI Research, and we're trying to build this model for the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains that will then be able to use our test sites that we're sampling in our watersheds and compare them to these reference sites in this reference model to assess basically how close or far away our sites are to being in reference condition or at least impacted condition. So that's pretty exciting, I think, kind of something new that we're trying to do. And we can go to the next slide. None of this work would be possible at all without the support of all the WPACs and the stakeholders, the cabin trainers and staff. Living Lakes Canada has played a huge role in, supporting the training and the collaborative as a whole. And then of course our funders, many of which are listed here, at least for OWC. I know that other groups have received funding possibly from other sources as well. And so if this collaborative that I'm sharing with you today has inspired hope and a desire for action in you, then I encourage you to reach out to your local WPAC or maybe a watershed stewardship group and find out if there's a way for you to volunteer. whether that's donning a pair of waders and wading out into a creek and collecting invertebrates, or maybe cleaning up garbage, or helping to restore stream banks, or educate local citizens. There's always something that we can do, that tangible action to inspire hope and make a real change locally that will have regional and national and global impacts ultimately. We can go to the next slide. I've included my contact information here if you would like more information. And I'm happy to answer the phone or emails, maybe once field season is over. Give it a couple weeks. We're pretty busy right now. And I look forward to chatting with folks in the breakout sessions, the Q&As after. And it's my understanding that Reagan will also be available in one of the sessions to answer any questions you might have for her. That's all I have.
Well, thanks so much, Sophie, and thanks for that call to action, call for involvement. The volunteers, I think it's kind of fitting to have that opportunity, given the session we had this morning and feeling connected to the land. And I love how OWC is out there encouraging all of us to get back on the land and get involved in the work. So thanks. Okay, we're going to switch gears a little bit here now and talk about the Climate Innovation Fund, which is an Alberta EcoTrust Foundation initiative. We're about 2 months away from our 1-year anniversary of receiving a $40 million endowment from the federal government that Pat talked a little bit about this morning in her opening remarks as part of the Low Carbon Cities Canada initiative. So in Alberta, we are deploying programs in Calgary and Edmonton to help the cities reduce emissions in the community and achieve their climate objectives. This program has a unique governance model. It has us working in direct partnership with the municipalities, but also through local advisory committees. We have been able to launch some very exciting initiatives, and I'm looking forward to Mike, Stephanie, and Jessica sharing them with you today. Mike Melrose is our program director at Alberta EcoTrust. He has nearly a quarter century of experience in climate change, sustainability, and environmental management, working across the public, private, and charitable sectors. I think there are a few people in Alberta with the depth of experience and understanding of climate policy in Alberta, and I feel very lucky that Mike has joined our team at Alberta EcoTrust. I'm also really looking forward to seeing how he has integrated Glass Tiger into this presentation, as I know he commits to that for me in all of his presentations. Joining Mike today is Stephanie Drazda. She's a program specialist with Alberta EcoTrust, and she has a passion for the environment that she cultivated while growing up in Northern Alberta. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Economics and Policy from the University of Alberta, and she has worked in the sustainability field for nearly a decade in both the post-secondary and municipal government sectors. And joining Stephanie and Mike is also Jessica Lajoie. She is the first engineer we have had on staff at Alberta EcoTrust, as she has an environmental engineering degree from the University of Guelph, which initially led to her working in the carbon offset sector in Alberta. And then after starting her family, she spent almost a decade working on the climate and corporate engineering teams at the city of Calgary. Both Jessica and Stephanie are avid gardeners, and in their spare time have been teaching me the ancient art of how to milk feed giant pumpkins. So with that, I'll turn it over to Mike, Jessica, and Stephanie.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Rod. And I know the session's called Cultivating Hope, but the first thing I'm going to do is crush Rod's hope that Glass Tiger is part of this presentation. It unfortunately is not. So thanks so much. I'm really excited to present some of the work that we've been doing over this last year. 2021 was the first fully operational year of the Climate Innovation Fund. And we hope to share some of our stories and our narrative, and some of the excitement that we have for the programming that we've put out there in the ecosystem, and then just talk a little bit about the future as well. And then we peppered the presentation with some lessons learned too, things that we're going to move forward with in the coming years, because it's been a really good year for learnings for us as well. So Haley, next slide, please. So Rod already did talk about this, but really the whole reason for being with respect to the Climate Innovation Fund is to accelerate climate solutions in Calgary and Edmonton. Next slide, please, Haley. And we do that actually through direct partnerships with the cities themselves. So we have formal memorandums of understanding with the City of Calgary and the City of Edmonton. And we actually take the lead on our programming from their municipal action plans. We're very lucky that both of those cities have quite progressive climate action plans, and there's lots of things for us to move forward with within those plans. We also have a partnership with the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. They are the holder of our funding agreement, but they also help us work across the country in something called the Low Carbon Cities Canada Network. Next slide, please, Haley. The Low Carbon Cities Canada Network is an incredible construct and ambitious network. It's coast to coast. From Halifax to Vancouver, there's basically 7 of the most populous metropolitan areas covered by the Low Carbon Cities Canada Network. And they are all basically looking at accelerating urban emissions reductions and working with the municipalities in which they work within to help increase climate action and accelerate addressing the urgency of climate action in the cities. We are looking at TAF within this model as kind of like the originator, the one we're trying to model. The Atmospheric Fund in Toronto is one of Canada's first climate agencies that's focused on urban emissions. So we have 30 plus years of their experience that we can learn from and try to replicate in the space here in Alberta. Next slide, please. With respect to what we focus on and how we arrive at our priorities, we are data and evidence-based. So we looked at the emissions inventories that are produced by both Calgary and Edmonton on an annual basis, and we looked for where the biggest bang for the buck was. So how we move forward with our programs, again, we take our lead from the municipal action plans, but we also look to the data. So the data sources suggest that the most emissions occur in the building sector. So we have one focus area on building better and retrofitting wiser, focusing first on retrofitting, as that's a huge challenge, a mountain to climb ahead of us. Moving on mobility, that's active transportation and low and no emissions vehicles. And we have a final bucket where we actually have a number of things that we're capturing, including a shift to renewable energy sources, as well as decarbonizing our fossil fuel system in some way. Things that fit the Alberta narrative, like the transition to hydrogen or potentially urban scale carbon capture and storage. And also other sequestration mechanisms that are probably very familiar with a lot of people in this crowd, nature-based solutions, and utilizing those to sequester carbon and utilize nature for the purposes of achieving our climate targets. Next slide, please. We have 3 approaches to deploying the funds and working across these sectors and achieving our mandate. One is that we undertake some strategic initiatives ourselves here at Alberta EcoTrust, and Jessica and Stephanie are going to present on some of the ones we've done in year 1. The other thing is we do build on Alberta EcoTrust's experience in the granting realm, and we have provided some grants. Very excited to say that we are about to fund 18 organizations, Calgary and Edmonton, to do some really incredible, innovative work, and that announcement will be coming out soon on who actually received our first year of funding. And the last one is a really unique part of our value proposition in that we have the ability to mobilize that one-time cash endowment provided by the federal government for the purposes of investing in emissions reducing projects within the cities in which we operate. So we can look for things like debt financing, or potentially look to take an equity stake in an emerging company that's providing technology that will reduce emissions, or other innovative low carbon financing tools like credit enhancement or potentially even transition bonds. So all of those things are on the table for us. We're still building that piece out, but a very exciting realm and a very robust and future thinking part of our value proposition. Next slide, please. So when it comes to some big learnings of just as we've launched the Climate Innovation Fund and some of our programming to date, one of the things I'd like to share with the group is just how amazing it has been to be part of a national network and be able to tell Alberta's story from an Albertan's perspective. Sometimes it's challenging, being that we've built all of our socioeconomic systems around a resource extraction economy. Getting that story out that we actually are believers in climate change, we want to pursue climate change action, and we understand the urgency and scale of the issue is very important across Canada. So we're very well positioned to work with the various centers across the country and really enlighten them on the Alberta journey that we're on. I also have, we've learned really how important it is to have impact quantification capabilities in-house, and also that we're also on the precipice of being leaders in that, not just Alberta EcoTrust, but building on the depth there is in Alberta in general when it comes to emissions quantification, but impact of other elements as well in some of the emerging areas like social equity. Definitely able to take a lead in that across the country again. It's really fascinating kind of space that we're working in, but we're talking about multi-solving and co-benefits, not just addressing emissions reduction, but we've realized we have to solve multiple wicked problems to address this issue. You can't just have climate change action off to the side. We need to fully integrate all of these co-benefits into our decision-making and the programming we do, including equity and justice, taking, some of the information we even heard this morning, but really integrating that into our decision-making, acknowledging that there's a lot to do there in terms of social equity and ensuring there's a just transition as we move to a low carbon future. I will hand it off to Stephanie now, who's going to talk about the grant program.
Great. If you jump to the next slide, please. So this year, we were also able to launch our Climate Innovation Fund grant program, like Mike mentioned. And if you go to the next slide, just a summary of what we had available. So we had nearly $100,000 total funding available both in Calgary and Edmonton to support the charities and nonprofits working in those cities, pursuing climate positive interventions, while also focusing on that justice and equity piece. So we were very excited to see all of the amazing projects that we got in. We had lots of interest, as you can see. The initial numbers of expressions of interest we received through the grant process. And as Mike mentioned, we'll be funding 18 projects over the 2 cities. And so that announcement is coming soon, so please stay tuned for that. Next slide, please. So we were really excited to see the projects that come forward, and it really demonstrates the innovation and impactful solutions that our nonprofit community and some of their for-profit partners are bringing forward in Edmonton and Calgary and beyond. So we're really excited about the potential for change that these projects present. We're also very fortunate to have support from the City of Edmonton and the Edmonton Community Foundation. They contributed to our grant program funding in Edmonton, which has allowed us to support more projects and really grow our impact. And we're excited to seek partnerships and make connections to support our grant program with other organizations and other parts of our work as well. We were also able to really connect with the organizations meaningfully and build relationships with these groups that are pursuing urban climate action in our cities, which has been really valuable for us to understand how we can best enable the organizations and ideas that are not only reducing emissions, but helping us realize those other environmental, social, and economic benefits. And so one of our kind of biggest learnings as we went through this process for the first time with the Climate Innovation Fund is we really want to make it very accessible for groups. We want to ensure that there's less burden on them, that they can use the funding to do their meaningful work. And so as an organization that values continuous learning and improvement, we will be looking for ways that we've identified and also that our applicants have brought to us to really simplify our process to make that more accessible. And I'll pass it to Jessica to lead us through our strategic projects.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. So the next slide, please. You can move forward to another one. So our strategic projects, as Mike mentioned, are projects that we steward and incubate internally, where we see a need or an opportunity that Alberta Eco Trust can fill a gap in connecting groups or applying for funds as a registered charity. So our first area that we've been working on is what we're calling accelerated retrofits in commercial buildings. So again, to bring you back to our three themes, we're looking at building better and retrofitting wiser. And as we know, buildings do make up a large portion of our greenhouse gas emissions in our cities, and retrofitting the current stock is a huge question mark in how we're going to get that done. So this one focuses on commercial buildings and has received funding externally from RBC, Tech for Nature grant, and has partnered with a company out of BC that is looking to get into the Alberta market. So we're really facilitating those relationships and expanding people with a lot of knowledge and experience into Alberta, a company named Audette that does digital audits on buildings. And the ultimate hope for us and learning for us is to connect those buildings with financing and see some of those opportunities for energy efficiency realized in these buildings. Next slide, please. Another project we're working on for residential homeowners is looking at green home loans. So you may have heard a lot of buzz about the CIP programs, which is a property assessed clean energy type program that is happening, that has been regulated, or the regulation's been passed in Alberta. So the cities can now finance energy efficiency upgrades in homes and allow people to pay that back through their property taxes. However, as EcoTrust, we're seeing this is a great start, but definitely needs to be scaled up in a much larger and quicker way to address the fundamental size of what we're looking to do. So we took it on through funding from FCM, and with a group called the Social Innovation Academy to look at even more options for how we can start to finance loans for homeowners to do their upgrades. Next slide, please. And one of our favorite innovative tech projects in our group is, Vicki alluded to it earlier, talking about the partnership with Clean02 and their fascinating building level technology that combines carbon capture with a financial model of generating a value add product from their process that they turn into soap. It's a really, one of a kind Calgary company that we are really excited to be partnering with. And this is our call to action, looking for nonprofits and charities that own buildings or have long-term even rental leases in buildings that would be potentially interested in piloting or installing one of these units. We are currently recruiting buildings for this, so please do reach out if you think you might have an opportunity that we would look at to really advance this technology. And next slide, please. Oh, I think we missed one. Okay, that's okay. Strategic. We have another one about digital labels for houses. So we're working on that one as well with again another group from BC that we're bringing into the Alberta market. So what are we learning about this? Stephanie and I joined in September, and it's taken in January, and it's taken until now, October, 10 months to really start to see some momentum on these projects. So we're learning the art of incubating strategic projects and getting our ideas funded through external funders and getting them off the ground and assembling the right partners. And it's really exciting that these are starting to take shape from ideas that we had months ago into real projects. Again, we're a small but mighty team, so the resourcing, as you all know, is always an issue, but ultimately we're really excited to be accelerating and integrating these projects into our market here in Alberta. I'll turn it back to Mike for last few thoughts.
Thanks. Next slide, please, Haley. So really, I'm just going to end it on just a few bullets just on looking to the future. We're really excited. We're building out our investment arm right now. We hope to launch something in 2022, some kind of an investment or some kind of a financial product or service that importantly is mission aligned. So we're looking for emissions reductions in addition to return on investment. We're looking at an environmental, social, and governance lens with all of our investments. So we want to make sure that that's a key component first, and then return on investment second. And sustained voice on the landscape. Through my career, it's been really challenging when I look outside the window, particularly when I was in government and local government, and I saw fledgling organizations that, you know, really wanted to have a voice on the climate space and talk on a consistent basis and advocate for new things. But it was just really challenging to have those organizations survive and continue with that over the long term. So I'm really excited that Alberta Eco Trust now can be positioned as a sustained voice on the landscape over time, talking about urban climate solutions and supporting groups in achieving their vision, as well as achieving the climate goals of the cities. So, and of course, growing our capacity. We're bringing on an investment director, and I think the more we can grow our capacity and build internally, the more we're going to be able to support the overall ecosystem and achieve the really deep emissions reductions goals that we need to achieve if we're going to maintain a 1.5 degree world. Thanks, Rod. I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Mike, Stephanie, and Jessica. Okay, we're going to switch gears one last time to our final presenters today, which is the Defend Alberta Parks campaign. And if you live in Alberta, then this campaign probably needs little introduction because you've seen the signs on tens of thousands of lawns across the province. Today, we are hearing from the Alberta Environment Network, or AEN, and the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society, or known as CPAWS. Presenting today is Natalie Odd. Natalie is the executive director of the Alberta Environment Network, and she has worked in the environmental nonprofit sector in Alberta for more than 20 years. This includes at Alberta Eco Trust, and she was actually the architect of this very event that you are all at today, the environmental gathering. Over the past year, AEN has partnered with other organizations for the Defend Alberta Parks and Protect All Water, Alberta Beyond Coal ground campaigns. I told Natalie I would like 10 minutes to introduce her. This would be the Natalie Odd way, but I think we'd all rather get to her presentation. I have such a special place in my heart for Natalie as someone who is committed to the core in addressing the root causes of environmental issues, and a deep gratitude for her. She really took me under her wing when I first joined the environmental sector, and she continues to show me how to lead with your heart, your soul, in all this work. Joining Natalie today is Jeff Wheeler. Jeff is the communications specialist at the Alberta Environment Network, where he supports these campaigns and working groups. He contributed to the design, websites, and information flow for the Defend Alberta Parks and Alberta Beyond Coal campaigns. And he's also an EcoTrust volunteer alumni and helping support some of our work many years ago. And from the CPAWS teams, we have two people. We have Becky Best-Burtwhistle and Tara Russell. Becky has worked as the Conservation Engagement Coordinator at CPAWS Southern Alberta since 2018. And Tara is the Program Director at CPAWS Northern Alberta. As I've gotten to know both of you over the last few years, I am always amazed at your passion for nature and conservation, your willingness to work with others to achieve the goals, to protect the places we value, and to have fun along the way. With that, I will turn it over to you four.
Thanks so much, Rod. Hopefully I'm coming in, you guys can hear me now? Yeah, excellent. Well, hi everybody. I'm still, even after 2 years, not used to presenting to black faceless squares. So it's a little weird without Facebook or feedback. But I wanted to thank you all so much for hosting us today, for us to talk about the success and the hope that the Defend Alberta Parks campaign brought to Albertans. I was going to introduce ourselves and our organizations, but I think Rod covered that well enough for us. But we all came together last year in the spring of 2020 to create the Defend Alberta Parks campaign, which, spoiler, was hugely successful. And we were all so grateful to be a part of it, and really grateful for all of the Albertans that stepped up to make it such a success. You can go to the next slide. So our entire goal of the campaign was to ensure that Alberta's parks remained protected and within the Alberta park system, which is a little insane. If you go to the next slide. Thanks. So as many of you are likely aware, in February 2020, the government of Alberta announced their Optimizing Alberta Parks plan, which was to remove the protections from 175 Alberta park sites and close 20 parks and change them to a vacant public land, which is a designation that doesn't offer the same protection priorities for wildlife, water, or ecosystems, nor does it prioritize responsible recreation. You can go to the next slide. So this shocking move was such a backslide in conservation. It drew international attention, but most of all, it left Albertans, who very clearly love their parks, as we've seen, quite angry at this potential loss and grappling for information on what this move really meant for these places that they love and a way to prevent it. The Alberta public was so ready to fight against the loss of their parks, but needed accurate and accessible information on what exactly these changes meant so that they could push back against confusing and often quite misleading information that was out there. And they also needed an avenue for action, which is really where we came in. For example, how many campsites, which we all love getting out into, was this going to impact, and which ones and where? Next slide. Or what's the difference between public land designations versus protected area designations? And as an organization, CPAWS has always been dedicated to accurate evidence-based materials and recommendations. And I think it was this diligence in our research and having a science communicator on our staff, which is what really empowered us enabled us to empower those who were so upset about this change. We can go to the next slide. And so I'm going to leave it to my colleagues to dive into this a bit further, but essentially our work was we provided tools, information and actions, but really it was Albertans who were passionate about their parks who provided us hope to continue in our campaign. I believe I'm handing it over to Jeff to talk about kind of the functions, the behind the scenes on how this actually worked.
Great, thanks so much. Again, I'm Jeff. I'm with the Alberta Environmental Network, and I supported the communications and websites and the design for the Defend Alberta Parks campaign. Let me speak today to the technical building blocks of the information flow, which tie in tightly to the campaign strategy that Natalie will speak to shortly. You go to the next slide, please. The technical infrastructure, most notably collecting lawn sign requests and distributing those orders to volunteers, was developed in parallel with the campaign strategy. There was clarity on the goals of the campaign and the desired actions of the public, so we were able to match the websites and information flow to that strategy. The core of the system is a series of forms that connect to a central database and then are filtered and distributed to shared spreadsheets, which regional coordinators could access and work with. Although more robust campaign technologies are out there, the simpler approach was highly customizable, so we could align it to the campaign strategy, and it was far more cost-effective to set up. The website allowed for some degree of scalability, but the system was tested during the peak weeks when orders were in the thousands and geographically dispersed. I consider a factor of success for the campaign being the close alignment between the campaign strategy, communications, and the actual structure and user experience of the website. Clarity on the strategy made it far easier to create the internal systems necessary to manage lawn sign requests and volunteers, business kit requests, and much more. If you have any specific questions about the infrastructure side, please send me a chat message and we can coordinate a conversation to go deeper. But for now, I'll pass it to my colleague, Natalie, to discuss the campaign strategy.
Thank you, Jeff. Can you hear me? Great. I can't overstate the importance of the system that Jeff set up. And he mentioned about scalability. Jeff really used the technology and optimized it, maximized it, because none of us could have envisioned how the campaign grew. So I'm really thankful that he was able to build it when we needed it. So my name's Natalie. As mentioned, I'm the Executive Director of the Alberta Environmental Network, and I work with Jeff at AEN. So as you've heard, the goal of the campaign was very clear: to oppose the closure and removal of parks from the Alberta park system. So CPAWS launched this campaign. They were on top of it right away, and starting to grow awareness of this issue amongst the public. And you can see from Tara's slides that CPAWS is really the expert in conservation and research and communications with media and spreading out into the community. So they had CPAWS had also done polling to establish that 7 out of 10 Albertans were opposed to these closures or removals, and that was really vital information as we built the campaign. So AEN stepped in after a few months. We wanted to see how we could support the efforts of CPAWS and how we could expand awareness of this issue, because we were finding that once people knew about it, they were very strongly opposed to this. So I would like to emphasize that months went into the planning of the strategies. From the time this was announced by the government of Alberta, we worked through the spring and the summer developing the strategies. So if we can move to my first slide, please. So this is the advocacy strategy framework. This was a really key document. Sorry if it's a little blurry there, but this is by Kaufman and Beer, and it's part of a 13-page document that I think is just a fantastic synopsis of how to build a campaign. You can see on the axes the changes from awareness through will to action, and the audiences from public, influencers, and decision makers. So not every campaign uses every strategy, of course, but the most effective ones use a combination. And I counted that Defend Alberta Parks actually used 9 of these strategies, and some of them evolved organically, where supporters would jump on social media and raise awareness that way. So it was really, we were quite successful in terms of the strategies. So as you know, we did a ground campaign. Personally, I have a lot of experience with ground campaigns, and this one was very successful, as Tara said. So it included the distribution of information sheets, which encouraged people to write letters, display lawn signs, and volunteer. I want to emphasize the amount of thought that went into the information sheet, the messages, how they were laid out, and also the images that were used. And I wanted to acknowledge Haley Banyard, who's the artist who helped design the information sheet with the graphics and also the lawn sign. There were a lot of nuances and details in there that were very thoughtfully included. So we started in Calgary, as you know, and expanded from there. I want to also emphasize the excellent collaborative relationship between CPAWS and AEN. We delegated out the duties. CPAWS was doing a lot of the research, speaking to media, doing town halls, a lot of the communications, whereas AEN was updating the building and updating the website, handling the data flow, doing logistics on the ground, managing volunteers, ordering supplies. Our 2 organizations, actually it's 3, because CPAWS North and CPAWS South, met regularly to monitor the campaign and adapt as needed. Can you go to the next slide, please? Here are key measurements. As you can see, very large number of lawn signs, letters written, and volunteers. Probably more letters than that even, because people did it on their own, but there were many written through the portal. 17,000 of those lawn signs were in Calgary alone, just to give you an idea. That's where we started. Had no idea how it would evolve, but eventually we'll see in the next slide, if you can move. This is a fun graph about the lawn sign orders. At the very beginning, we were thrilled to get 10 lawn sign orders a day. We did not know how it would expand at that point, but as you can see, it grew and grew to the point where at peak there was 500 plus lawn sign orders a day. And you can see that there's a few spikes there. Interestingly, those were a result of the government of Alberta doing media events, which only drew more attention and support to our campaign. And next slide. So this is how it expanded. You can see we started in Calgary and it expanded to 15 cities and towns. And that was only possible, as Tara alluded to, because of the support of hundreds and hundreds of volunteers that were willing to go door to door delivering these information sheets, sometimes in really bad weather. So finally, I'll just emphasize, for the campaign, we put a lot of time into planning and strategy, thoughtful messaging and graphics, excellent collaborative relationship between CPAWS North, CPAWS South, and AEN. And finally, it was only possible because of the volunteers. Thank you.
Thanks, Natalie. Hi, everybody. I'm Becky, as Rod introduced off the top. If you could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to be talking a little bit about how the campaign was more than just the lawn sign, even though it's the most recognizable part and it's pretty iconic at this point, and it sparked a bit of a invasion of the lawn signs. So, Halloween themed scary. There's a lot more going on beyond just the lawn sign itself. So like Natalie mentioned, each lawn sign represented at least one letter sent to government. And beyond that, it also represented a dedicated volunteer who got the lawn sign there, and a person who, probably dipped their toe into advocacy for the first time by ordering the sign. And this is the sign in front of my house. That was one of the first ones in August. Next slide, please. During this campaign, we also fostered a number of successful relationships with local outdoor and sustainable businesses. Their involvement was pretty significant because to me, it really signaled how valuable the public park system was to their businesses. Because of the extensive background research that Tara outlined, the businesses really felt that we were keeping them in the loop, and we were also able to provide briefings for staff so they could effectively communicate the issue to customers and clients. This resulted in a number of businesses across the province, not just in the cities, hosting our materials and organizing sign pickup days at their stores for us and collecting donations for us as well. So now people were not only hearing about the issue at their doors through the mail drop and from their neighbors with lawn signs, but they were also hearing about it at businesses they respected and that were part of their community. And that's something that we know is especially important to members of the outdoor recreation community. Next slide, please. This constant hum of the issue, the leading by example of prominent individuals and businesses, and our work to provide consistent and accurate information really created a new and dedicated group of advocates for this cause. I think this image, that's courtesy of our good friends Baron Fox, that they did for Peace with Good Planet project, really represents the journey many of our supporters took. The movement was kind of built on top of the lawn signs, and the lawn signs became a tool that allowed people to get their foot in the door to becoming advocates. Our efforts to put out this information and arm our supporters to confidently talk to their neighbors, engage with government officials, post on social media, and many of them even went on to organize their own actions. So, roadside protests, fundraisers, all this stuff. In fact, when an oppositional misinformation campaign was launched in response to ours, our supporters were really easily able to debunk that misinformation on their own. And as a result, that oppositional campaign flopped. Next slide, please. These people became advocates, well-informed advocates in their own right. They weren't just being organized by us, they were really mobilizing themselves and each other, I would say. Defend Alberta Parks didn't end with defeating the Optimizing Alberta Parks plan. And I know that the community we've built around this issue will continue to defend our parks and natural places into the future. And I just want to acknowledge that, of course, there's more of us involved behind the scenes on this project than just the four of us today. Some are in the audience, so I really want to give a big thank you out to everybody involved. Next slide, please. These are some of our funders that supported the project. It was mainly supported by individual donors. They were a huge driver of being able to do this, but also these organizations and businesses supported us as well. Next slide, please. It's my final slide. And we still have a bunch of stickers and pins. So, if you're feeling nostalgic, if you took down your lawn sign and you still want to rep the Defend Alberta Parks cause, you can go to this URL and we will mail you out pins and stickers if you're interested. So that's it for us. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Becky, and thanks, Tara and Jeff and Natalie. Recognizing that we were getting close to 12:30 p.m. and we do really want to honor the lunch break that we have today, and it's a long day. So maybe I will just stick with, one question I've been holding and circulate it through each of you to answer as we close out here. But, it really occurs to me that number one, a lot of this work is just highly collaborative. And I'm curious to know what you've learned about working together in this way. And it seems to me that it's enabling us a different kind of scale to our work. I think through all this amazing stories of hope, that these are still very small teams and organizations working on big challenges and getting lots done. So maybe we can kind of we'll just go around and talk about what you've learned about working together. What does it take to work collaboratively like this, and how is that enabling a different kind of success? And maybe I'll start with you, Sophie.
That's a really good question. I'm not sure. I guess, communication is really important. And for our project, the fact that it kind of coincided with COVID, when everybody was switching to online means of communication, they actually went really well together, because we were able to have meetings virtually with folks from down in Pincher Creek and all the way up to Athabasca and the Mighty Peace watershed. And there have been some technical difficulties along the way for sure, but I think that's been a really, I don't know if it's like something we learned, but it was just something that happened at the same time, and that really helped us in communicating, having people getting more familiar with doing the virtual, the video calls and things like that. And just that it is a network, and the collaboration, having, support from people at all steps along the way, people who have been part of the program, who are just starting out and wanting to find information, and then having the support from people who have had more experience, and not trying to go it alone has been really, really helpful, I think, to all the individual groups, because I think a lot of us, we are small organizations. You might have one communications person, you might have one stewardship person, it might be the same person sometimes, and it can be really isolating when you're the only one trying to do this work. So the fact that there are these collaboratives where you're able to connect with people across the province, then that's been really powerful as well.
Thanks, Sophie. Maybe I'll pass it over to you now, Mike. I know you highlighted how you're working nationally, but so what have you learned about working at that scale, and maybe also locally, and partnering so closely with the institutions of the municipalities?
Yeah, I give this one a lot of thought quite frequently, because I often refer back to that proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. I truly believe that, like, we need to work together. These are massive societal shifts that we're trying to achieve in the climate space. And what I've learned, though, is that you need to be intentional and have the time to do that. And my worry on that same front, though, is that we have less than a decade to turn a giant ship around. And I really would love to get some guru-like advice on how you go fast and go together, because we need to somehow crack that nut. And I think having sustained relationships over time does help with that. So if you are able to network aggressively, have a lot of people that and their expertise, and you can understand how to work together, helps you also work quickly. So I think we need to do as much of that as we can, and all hands on deck, and just keep moving.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, I'm going to pass it to Tara from CPAWS, and then I think we'll finish with Natalie, and I think she'll be able to take us over some like guru advice Mike's looking for, I'm hoping. But, what do you think, Tara?
Well, I mean, I do think Natalie's a guru, so there's that. I would echo some of what Sophie said, in that we are small organizations, that individuals are often wearing many, many hats, but wearing too many hats looks really silly and isn't great all the time. So I would say what we learned from our Defend Alberta Parks work, which was a true collaboration not only between our 2 CPAWS chapters, but with the AEN and our over 1,000 volunteers and people who showed up so hard for this issue, is that we had amazing recognition of where our strengths were and where our weaknesses were. And we really kind of narrowed out those niches for ourselves, and it allowed us to be so much more effective in that way when we didn't have to wear 8 hats. We got to wear the one hat that looks really good on us. And I really think that made us a huge success. And I look forward to more collaborations like that in the future where we know what our role is and that we can do our part of the role really well. Anyway, thanks. I'll pass it off to our guru, Natalie.
Thanks, hardly guru, but I'll echo what Tara said, that I actually feel this collaboration was really special. You don't always get this situation, which seemed really kind of sublime, where we had established relationships amongst everyone in the group, but this just took it to another level. As Tara said, there was just phenomenal complementary skill set, just an excellent fit. We were so fortunate that way. And I also feel people were open-minded about the strategies. We really, as I mentioned, had to talk through what the strategies and tactics would be, and many of them were new to us, and people were just really open-minded. And finally, I'll just say, I think we all shared an interest in the excellence of the campaign in terms of excellent research, just always being factual, taking the high road when we were opposed by people, sticking to our messaging, and it was just really high standards for the messaging and the graphics. And I think we all shared that. And yeah, it was just excellent. And I think really, yeah, I think it sets a very high bar for AEN in terms of collaborations moving forward.
All right. Well, thanks so much to all of you for the work you've been doing and for contributing your time today and sharing your story with us. I do feel much more hopeful yet again from hearing these stories and hearing more about what you've learned along the way. That takes us to the end of the morning session. So thank you to all of you for participating. We now have